MOvember, day 28, it's Sunday, and it's 9 p.m. I've had a good day of visitors in church and rehearsing for the carols coming up, and this is probably an ambitious video to do tonight because I want to get to a movie, but I'm going to attempt it. And for anyone that's known me at all in my work, I still go back to the work of Pia Mellody and her pioneering work in the world of trauma and addictions. And so tonight I'm just going to do a quick overview of her Developmental Immaturity Model, which can be found in those books that you can see there. The Facing Codependency, which was the phrase that the publishers and that sort of required at the time, the term. Her books have been mixed up with the early co-addict, co-addiction models, which some of those characteristics feature here. But this was a book, and it was a model ahead of its time, and her story is available on the podcast that you can get through the Meadows. And this is an overview of their model that they use, that Pia developed, really through saving herself and then helping other people grow up to save themselves as well. So the model itself here is, I've just put this image in there so you can see it. It has a flow to it, and that's what we're going to look at. What happens from the impact of trauma in someone's development, the symptoms that it creates for them, the secondary symptoms, and the relational problems. And if you look at the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, this model, written back in the 80s, certainly has been confirmed by those large studies that have been done about the effects of early life experiences and less than nurturing behavior. So let's just go through and break this down a little so we can see it. So the model will be this video is probably not going to do justice to each little part. When you do work in a place like the Meadows, it requires you to do a lecture on each section of this. You could speak for an hour on each section and still not cover it, but I'll do my best to put the jigsaw puzzle together. Now, as an overview of the idea, it reads as this: that there's a nature of a child that needs to get met. And if that nature is not nurtured, then childhood trauma will occur. And in this flow of childhood issues, that immaturity that comes from not being able to mature, that, as Pete Walker says, we go from thriving to surviving, then results in this unmanageability that will lead to relational problems that you'll see in the evidence of intimacy issues. And if you read that in salmon, that color there, childhood trauma causes immaturity, and they both then drive unmanageability, and all three create problems with being intimate. So let me take you through just what that looks like as quick as I can. So the first thing, Pia, when she worked on this model, really looked, characteristically as what does a child need to flourish, to not nice to have, just needs to really have so they can actually grow up to be themselves. And so she identified these 5 areas. That firstly, children need to be valued. If there's a big person and a little person, this big person needs to love themselves and love their child. That this little person is very vulnerable, and this person is also vulnerable too, but they have access to resources. So this person that loves themselves and loves their child can now keep their child safe. That in regard to humanity, our body, thinking, feelings, and behavior, and how we experience life, we're perfectly imperfect. And we need to teach that to our children whilst at the same time steward their growth. And Pia used to talk about doing for, helping do, and then being of support in that 0 to 17 age span. And then as a child gets to know their body, thoughts, feelings, and behavior, while we're stewarding in that do for, help do, and then stand back and be of support, we're teaching them about their needs and wants. And early on, we've got to meet them. Pretty quickly, we start teaching kids to start meet some of their own needs. And then eventually it really is, if we've done our job well, they'll be coming to us for support. Children also need an environment where they can be spontaneous and open. If you create a safe place where you're valuing, creating boundaries and safety, really allowing and tuning someone into their body, thoughts, feelings, and behavior, acknowledging all of those areas, and then helping them to identify and meet their needs and wants and learn to meet them themselves, then that person's going to be able to blow out their birthday cake candles each year and be able to grow and mature a little bit and be open about themselves because they've been engaged with by people who are engageable. They're present as well. So that's what a child needs. Now, if that process gets interfered with through trauma, physical, sexual, intellectual, emotional, or spiritual, or neglect or abandonment, then that process of maturing gets interrupted, and we see signs of developmental immaturity. And so what happens then is these core issues develop in those 5 core areas. And this is where it gets deep. You'll see a child live in extremes. Self-esteem issues will start to see the emergence of an inner critic, but also an outer critic. We'll see a less than and a better than others. And that makes it really difficult to live inside your own skin and then be in relationship with others. Excuse me. Boundary issues. So, Pia says here that you would be having to, a child was going to have damaged boundaries around the internal boundaries, thoughts and feelings. Only I can determine what's true or not true for me. Same goes for you. Physical boundaries. Only I can determine with whom and how I want to be touched, and same goes for you. And sexual boundaries. Only I can determine about, who, what, where, and when, and how I want to be sexual. So we're going to have boundary issues. At a sense of reality, our body, thinking, feelings, and behavior, again, we're going to feel at our core bad and flawed, but we will try and find ways to act good and perfect. And for some of us addicts, where good and perfect doesn't work, we end up being rebellious, like the rules don't apply to us. Again, living in extremes. With dependency issues, we're going to feel too needy. We never had them met. We never got taught how to meet them. And so with that covering up that neediness, we're going to see this confusing wants for needs, or that we become needless and wantless. And so largely at the bottom, what you'll see is moderation issues. We really struggle to contain ourselves and protect ourselves from others. And in this, what that looks like is this wounded part of us is less than, too vulnerable, bad and flawed, too needy, and therefore really chaotic, and we'll experience ourselves very dysregulated. But we will learn to adapt and cover that up by acting better than, invulnerable, and we will act either good and perfect, like I said, or rebellious, like the rules don't apply. We'll act needless and wantless, or confuse needs for wants, and largely be living in a sense of control. So those 2 extremes can largely be unconscious early on. And in regards to our reality, we've got all of the known narrative injury, and we've got all of the somatic, implicit, explicit memory issues that around our reality. So our body will keep the score. We will have lots of stress that is about to get explained, how that we start to become aware of that. So those primary core issues, primary symptoms, lead to a secondary symptom, and this is where we start to see unmanageability. Those symptoms start to act themselves out in our lives. And so you will see negative control issues in a relationship, because I don't have boundaries, I don't have a core sense of inherent worth, I don't really know who I am and feel comfortable about it. I'm not confident I can move in and out of relationships because I can moderate and contain myself. So I'm going to need to either influence how you think, feel, and do, or allow you to influence how I think, feel, and do, so we can relate, and that causes lots of problems. There will also then, because of a lack of boundaries, be a lot of resentment. And resentment from the French language is to re-feel. So in other words, I don't process things, I'm not looking after myself, I'm not setting boundaries, and therefore I'm carrying a lot of feeling that's not getting processed and resolved. And eventually that's going to come out as rage. Now for some of us that's silent violence, it's a passive aggression. Some of us it's an active aggression. Real issues in relationships, but real issues physically as we carry all that stress. Spirituality issues is an interesting one, because I already did a video on step 2 for Pia Mellody and what can happen when we're abused as a child. But essentially, when you're stuck in immaturity, it's like when a child is being stewarded in their spiritual growth or Christianity. If they're stewarded by their parents until they're old enough to come of age and do a confirmation of their own faith. And so what happens with developmental immaturity, we might reach that milestone on our driver's license or the number on our birthday card, but we don't meet it spiritually. We never really get to a place where we feel we're our own person and struggle enormously to have a relationship with any sense of a higher power. The sense of a higher power we have will be a direct reaction to how we were raised. So we're going to have these spirituality issues that result in a sense of internal crisis. In regards to our dependency needs, we're going to see now difficulties in three core areas: addiction issues, process and chemical, mood disorders and mental health problems, and physical issues. If anything, the adverse childhood experience study confirmed was this information. Pia said that you will see stress-related and physical illness issues that are a result of this untreated failure to thrive childhood trauma. Now, if you have, in regards to how you experience yourself, negative control issues, problems with resentment and rage, spiritual issues resulting in an internal crisis that then need us to medicate our daily state because we can't self-regulate through addictions, mood disorders, or physical illness, we are going to have intimacy issues. If you go off that breakup of the word intimacy to into me see, I don't want you to see any of that. I'm going to do everything I can to cover that up. And that's with the two great lies of developmental immaturity. How are you? I'm fine. Oh, you don't look fine. Oh, I'm a bit tired. Usually that gets rid of everybody unless they're nosy. So we will struggle to let others in and let ourselves out. And that's going to play out in all of our relationships. So next, we look at, well, what sort of problems arise from these intimacy issues. So firstly, we have relational self-esteem, and briefly explain, that means I'll largely place myself as one down from you or one up from you. And Pia has a great, I think I did a video on one of my other MOvember campaigns about her relational tips, about how we will argue facts, assign blame, and keep score. And that's what we do with this one down and one up business. So we rarely walk through life, as John Bradshaw said, with ease and grace. We're walking through in this constant assessment, esteem assessment against each other. And I think that's where Kristen Neff comes along and says, look, mindful self-compassion really helps with that, because even working on our self-esteem can for a long time feel transactional. That relationally, you're going to see problems with enmeshment and avoidance. We either get too entangled with each other, what you think determines what I think, what I feel determines what you feel, or too avoidant. To get away from that enmeshment, we either bounce back. And so we get lonely out here, and back we come in for some more. And that enmeshment can be positive, I love you, and we get our identity and worth from that, or I hate you. It can be a really bad loop. And so we'll do this in out experience in regards to our relationship with enmeshment and avoidance. That internal feeling bad and flawed, desperately trying to cover that up by being good and perfect or rebellious like it doesn't matter, is just fundamentally dishonest. I just don't have the language, the ability, the makeup to be able to feel safe enough to share myself. And so largely we'll be dishonest. And a lot of the time it's through omission. We just don't tell people what's going on, if you've got developmental trauma and struggle with emotional flashbacks, life can be really difficult from the moment you wake up. So we're not going to answer that question at the water cooler at work at morning tea with, how are you? Oh, well, look, thanks for asking. I woke up in a flashback. I was covered in sweat. I was panicking. I really hated myself. I felt suicidal. I had a midi glass of vodka just to calm my nerves. I've eaten a bunch of sugar on the way in. I really think after work I'm going to go and act out at the casino. But anyway, how are you doing? A lot of the time, if you've got addictions or depression or anxiety or suicidality, we're just going to lie. It's just too hard and too much. We're going to see interdependence issues. So around dependency and meeting our needs and wants, I'm going to want you to either meet them, or I'm going to not have anyone come anywhere near me. And I'm going to struggle moving in and away. We don't do interdependence well, where I know I'm responsible for my needs and wants, but relationally I can invite you in and ask if you can be part of it, but I'm the manager. What'll happen with this is I'll either want you to do everything or I'll avoid everybody, and it sort of fits in with that number two. Because of that negative control, resentment and rage, spiritual crisis, and then the addictions, mood disorders, and physical health issues that result in the intimacy issues that then lead to the one up, one down, enmeshment avoidance, dishonesty, interdependence issues. Man, we are intense people to be around. We're just running at a high level of tension. I think John Bradshaw said he thought every person that had developmental trauma had to have a generalized anxiety disorder at least, because it's just too much for people. It's too hard. So if you relate to any of this, Pia has a reality model, which maybe I'll share for tomorrow. Maybe this is leading into what I'll share tomorrow. Because she says, look, what happens here is no one can come to our rescue. We can get help. We can get professional help. Things like therapists that are trauma-informed are really good with this. And with trauma-informed therapy will also be somatic therapy, not just a cognitive therapy. So it deals with the stuff that's stuck in the body and the stuff that we have that's, the negative distortions in our head. And so that implicit, explicit memory both gets dealt with. But largely, she says that support is to help us grow ourselves up so we can nurture that part of us that feels less than, unsafe, and bad and flawed and too needy. And that we can contain and start to manage that part of us that feels better than, invulnerable, good and perfect, or rebellious, needless and wantless. That process of reparenting and getting ourselves the support like a spiritual grandparent is what Pia used to talk about, to help us through that process as we grow ourselves up, is the rescue. But it's always longer than we want and harder than we think, but it's possible. So if any of this is perked your interest, if you've come across this video and you've got questions, please reach out, either Codependents Anonymous, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, or a professional therapist that's trauma-informed can maybe help you take that next step to get help. And also, please contact me, because this is what I do, and that's my wheelhouse. And I don't just deal with addictions, and I don't just deal with mental health issues. I deal with the underlying traumas that create them. So be gentle with your heart, and I look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video.